Sonic Forces has some of the best level design in the entire series.
Yeah, happy April Fool's Day, you muppets.
Sonic Forces is not only the worst mainline Sonic game, however it also has some of the worst level design in the entire series, which is what we're going to be going over in today's video. We're going to break it down character by character, stage by stage, to see what really went wrong with this game. Firstly, going over a few issues I have. The first one being that, considering this is a story about traveling the world to literally take back the world from Dr. Eggman, I think that the level variety is pretty boring and basic. There are 30 stages in the entire game, boss fights included, however you go to the same 6 locations the entire time. I mean, we have Green Hill Zone, we have the chemical plant, we have the Death Egg, we have the city, we have the forest, and we have the final battle area. And I'm sorry, but when the original Sonic game in 1991 has the same amount of level variety and aesthetics, I think that's a problem, especially since I'm fairly certain that game took place on one island, not around the entire fucking planet. Especially since these level aesthetics aren't original in the slightest, and it reuses aesthetics from previous games an awful lot. I mean, take a game like Unleashed, which gave us 9 brand new locations never seen before or since, and that game released 9 years earlier. And I want to make it absolutely clear now, I don't think that reusing aesthetics is the end of the earth. After all, Sonic Generations is one of my favourite Sonic games, and that game lives and dies on the whole reusing aesthetics thing. However, the thing that makes that game really good is that not only does it reuse aesthetics, however, it actually transforms the original levels and makes something fun as a result. However, another thing that screws the level design in Forces is just how short and restrictive these stages are. By Sonic Forces standard, a long level is around 2 minutes long, maybe a little bit longer, and that just feels deflating, especially since this game does occasionally have pretty interesting moments with the level design, but unfortunately, just as the stage gets going, the stage also ends, and that just feels deflating. But are those the only issues that plague Sonic Forces, having unoriginal levels as well as short levels? Well, let's begin with Modern Sonic. Starting things off with Modern Sonic, he basically is just a watered down version of the modern Sonic that we all know and love from games like Unleashed and Generations. I mean, he can boost, he can homing attack, I think he can slide, and his air boost is fucking broken in this game, allowing you to fly over the fucking stages. But aside from that, his moveset is very stripped down compared to previous games. I mean, he can't wall jump, he can't lightspeed dash, and he can't drift either, making his controls feel very restrictive compared to how they were in previous outings. Sonic's top speed was also drastically decreased for this game, as you could no longer reach the breakneck speeds that you could in Generations and Unleashed, and unfortunately, this trade-off in speed didn't give you a better sense of control, as I swear down his controls in this game feel way worse than they were in Generations. Not only are his physics completely fucked, sometimes you'll overshoot a jump and sometimes you won't get nearly enough mid-air momentum in order to actually make a jump, making the most basic of platforming sometimes very nail-biting. But he just doesn't feel nearly as fun to control in 2D sections, especially given how limp his double jump feels. Modern Sonic has 7 stages in Forces, so let's take a look at them. Lost Valley, or Green Hill Zone, is basically the tutorial stage of this game, and as a result I wasn't expecting too much. However, even with my lowered expectations, this stage just falls flat on its face. The first 30 seconds of this stage is spent with you doing nothing but boosting and occasionally jumping. You don't even need to engage with the homing attack chains because you can just air boost over them, which then transitions into a 2D section where there's a whole lot of nothing. I mean, seriously, you can just keep on boosting through literally every single obstacle, occasionally jump here and there when the game requires you to. The background aesthetic is pretty nice, and it's pretty cool that Green Hill Zone transitions into a more deserty stage halfway through, but that doesn't really count for much when the stage itself is so tediously boring. With it transitioning back into 3D in a section that I can only describe as simply boost to win. There's no platforming difficulties of any kind, no challenging enemies, no incredible set pieces that became instantly iconic. There's nothing, just boost until you reach the goal ring. It's deflating, and as a tutorial stage, it's definitely one of the weakest ones in the series for me. Egggate is a stage with basically no 3D platforming elements whatsoever, as the entire stage is spent rail grinding in the 3D sections and doing the most basic of platforming in the 2D sections. Now, to give credit where credit's due, I really like the cinematic spectacle at the end where Sonic jumps from ship to ship, but at the end of the day it's just a glorified QuickTime event, and once it concludes, the stage itself also ends. It's such a shame because this could have been the transition into something greater, but no, the stage just ends. Final chase and final rush, this ain't. Next stage on the chopping block is the infamous Luminous Forest, and yeah, I don't need to tell you how this stage begins. We all know it's just 18 seconds of nothingness, just boosting through fodder enemies that don't pose a threat to you in the slightest. And after boosting through a 2D section that was so bland and easy that I beat it with one hand just by boosting and jumping in my recent livestream, we get to this section. These turnpike sections could have been amazing if we had the drift ability, as drifting down them whilst keeping the speed up and plowing through enemies could have made for a very interesting challenge. However, this isn't in Sonic Forces. All you're doing is just boosting through the enemies whilst fighting the controls and trying not to fall off the edge. Where it then transitions into another 3D section where you do nothing but boost along a straight path before you get to the snake section. However, just like Egggate, whilst I find myself liking this spectacle, that's all it is, a spectacle. It's just a glorified QuickTime event, and then once you beat it, the stage ends, and it's just like, well, fuck. Sunset Heights is a stage that's so bland that people leading up to the game's release initially thought it was the tutorial stage. I mean, you do some light 3D platforming, then air boost over the rest of the stage, and yeah, that's it for the 3D section. As for the 2D section, you make a couple of jumps here and there, go on a few grind rails, and then you boost to the end, and that's it. It feels like they wanted to do so much with this stage, as it has one of the most appealing backgrounds in the entire game, but as far as its gameplay goes, it's just so lackluster. Thank God this stage got redeemed in Shadow Generations, at least. Network Terminal is literally just a watered down version of Chemical Plant from Sonic Generations. The 3D section basically involves you boosting on grind rails and then doing a small skydiving section, and whilst yeah, this is cool, it's only the intro of the stage, as the remainder of the level is spent in these crappy 2D sections that just don't flow very well. And after that, you just boost to the goal ring. Not only is this worse than Sonic Generations, but I think it's also a spit in the face to the Mania version of Chemical Plant that we received months earlier. Metropolitan Highway is one of the better modern Sonic stages in Forces, as it strikes a nice balance between 2D and 3D. However, that doesn't change the fact that what you're doing in these stages is just elementary platforming in the 2D chunk, and then boosting along paths of nothingness and doing grind rail sections in the 3D segments. It's a pretty cool level and is one of the more beautiful ones in Forces, but again, it just has nothing much to offer substance-wise. The final modern Sonic stage in this game is Mortar Canyon, and just like Metropolitan Highway, this is one of my favourite boost stages in the game. One, because it's entirely 3D, and it also has some of the most interesting platforming opportunities in the entire game. However, this only makes up a chunk of the stage, as once again, all you're doing in other sections is just going on grind rails where absolutely nothing happens, and then boosting forwards through hordes of fodder that pose no threat to you, meaning that even the better designed Forces levels really aren't free from this uninspired level design choices. Suffice it to say, I don't think Forces handled the boost formula very well. Not only does Sonic control like shit and he has a watered down moveset, however, there's not much to do with him in these levels, since they're ridiculously short and barely offer any challenging platforming opportunities at all. However, Modern Sonic was only 1/3 of the overall package. For starters, every issue that I mentioned regarding Modern Sonic also applies to the Avatar, ranging from the inconsistent physics to the lackluster moveset. However, the Avatar makes things even worse since he doesn't have the boost, meaning that the acceleration issues are even worse with him, and getting the hang of platforming, especially in 2D sections, is at its worst with the Avatar. To give credit where credit's due, you can mitigate these issues by picking the bird animal as your Avatar, as you get the double jump ability built into his kit. However, having to choose a certain animal to mitigate an issue with the game isn't exactly a compliment, it's more so Stockholm Syndrome, I guess. The main things that the avatar gets is this homing attack grapple hook, which completely kills all pacing within the stage, as well as the Wispons. These weapons were certainly an interesting idea, at least, giving the avatar a certain attack and a certain traversal option depending on the wisp that you choose. However, I feel like they could have been better introduced. When playing the stage with the avatar, you'll see empty wisp capsules all over the damn stage, and the reason for this is because you're not using the required wisp that the stage wanted you to choose. And as a result of this, I feel like the Wispons are not necessarily down to personal preference, however it feels as though there's a specific wisp that the game wants you to use for specific stages. Sure, you can go into any stage with whatever Wispon you like, and hell, if you play your cards right, you don't even need to use your Wispon at all. However, it makes the wisps feel more situational than they were in Sonic Colors, and they were mostly optional in that game. But in Forces, it feels like the game is literally restricting you from certain shortcuts and certain pathways just because you didn't choose the ability that the game wanted you to choose. It feels weird and could have been executed better. That being said, some of the abilities for the Wispons are really fun to use. For example, the Burst Flamethrower is very satisfying to plow through hordes of enemies, and the Drill ability is fucking broken in 2D sections as you get so much speed from it. But again, it feels like the Wispons were designed for very niche situations, because using the Drill, for example, in 3D sections is just an accident waiting to happen. The Avatar has 8 stages in Forces, and we're going to begin with Spaceport. And again, there's not much to this level. You're just running in a straight line, destroying enemies, grinding on rails, doing the most generic of platforming. I mean, there's a very cool cinematic where you avoid getting run over by a train, but really that's the only highlight of the level. Prison Hall sees the avatar drifting in automatic sections that take the control away from the player, and aside from that you're just running in a straight line, and then after that it's a massive 2D section and then one long run towards the goal ring. There's really nothing here either. Arsenal Pyramid is one of my favourite Avatar stages, as there's actually a large emphasis on 3D platforming, and also you swap controls between the Avatar and modern Sonic as you have the Wispon and the Boost at your disposal. This is one of the few stages to incorporate the double boost, which is the biggest joke in terms of gameplay. You can literally not mash the button and the game will automatically perform the double boost for you. In other words, the game is literally playing itself. And whilst I really enjoy the platforming sections in the second half of the stage, if you bring the Lightning Wisp you can skip most of it, so there's really not much to talk about. Aqua Road certainly lives up to its name as you spend around 15 seconds doing 3D platforming and the entire rest of the stage is in these shitty turnpike sections that control like ass, so it's really not that good of a stage. Capital City is one of the more interesting Avatar levels, because whilst what you're doing in these stages is the same as every other stage, just running forward, destroying enemies and doing shitty 2D platforming, it's one of the more unique stages as Infinite is messing around with the gravity, meaning that the floor becomes the ceiling and vice versa, giving you some pretty interesting spectacles within this stage. However, that doesn't really change the fact that what you're doing in the stage isn't all that interesting to begin with. Guardian Rock is one of the few Avatar stages that is exclusively 2D, and as a result, the abysmal physics for the Avatar is at its worst here. Thankfully, we do get a pretty cool spectacle where the Avatar encounters one of Eggman's robots at the end of a stage, and it's pretty cool how that robot pursues you throughout the stage, but that's really all that it has going for it. Spectacle over substance. Null Space begins with a pointless double boost segment where once again you don't have to do anything, the game will just play itself, and then from there the stage is riveting as you are going on grind rails towards the next set of enemies. Before going on grind rails to the next set of enemies. Oh, but then you go on grind rails to the next set of enemies. Truly riveting stuff here. Imperial Tower is the other exclusive 2D stage to the Avatar, meaning that if you don't bring the right wisp or you don't pick the bird, you're gonna have a miserable time here. Thankfully, I always bring the drill because it allows you to pretty much skip the entire stage. Final Judgment is, well, you guessed it, the final stage in the game. However, it's certainly a bit anticlimactic. I mean, it's just a quick stepping section, then you grind on some rails, then you destroy some enemies in a segment that is probably more annoying than it was intended on being, and then you just double boost towards the goal ring. The game basically plays itself for 3/4 of this stage. which is a reoccurring theme in Forces, it seems. Unfortunately, this leaves the Avatar as a bit of a mixed bag, as whilst the Wisp-Uns were a cool idea, they weren't implemented very well, and I think that his stages were overall either mid at best or downright awful at worst. But unfortunately, the worst is yet to come. Classic Sonic was basically thrown into Forces to sell more copies, as he does fuck all in the story aside from saving Tails from someone that Tails should have definitely been able to fight by himself, but I digress. To give credit where credit's due, Classic Sonic at the very least has his moveset locked down, he has the spin dash, and he even has the drop dash from Mania. He basically has everything except the super peel out, however it's very difficult to enjoy his gameplay because his physics just do not work. Sometimes his jump is floaty, other times it's heavy. It's basically the same issues with the other characters, but at its worst here because of how rigid the gameplay is. I mean, for fuck's sake, his top speed is slower than the boost, meaning that whenever you get a speed boost, Classic Sonic then has to slow down because his top speed is slower than the fucking stage will allow you to go, which is stupid. Also, with Classic Sonic, you basically have to spam the spin dash even more than you had to do in Generations because you can barely get any momentum with his default speed, which unfortunately makes him easily the worst controlling of the three characters, which is saying quite a lot. Gone are the days where you could gather enough speed to literally outrun the fucking cameraman if you were good enough. Nope, you have to go at the speed that Forces will allow you to, because God forbid you interact with the game yourself. Classic Sonic also got the short end of the stick when it came to his stages, as he only has 6, the shortest amount of any character in the game, and his level design is very much scraped from the bottom of the barrel. His level in the Sunset Heights area sucks. He has easily the most bland and forgettable run-through Green Hill Zone, which is a fucking insult. Casino Forest is just a watered-down version of Casino Night from the original Sonic 2, right down to having the pinball physics, the jackpots, as well as the springs that bounce you up when you hold the button. His run-through of Chemical Plant Zone was just a watered-down revisit of his run through the stage in Sonic Generations. Death Egg had some of the most boring, annoying platforming segments in the entire game, and it doesn't help the fact that it's easily the longest stage in the game, being around 3 minutes long. I know, fucking marathon stage over here. And his run-through of Iron Fortress can just go fuck itself. Stage hazards are placed in the most awkward and annoying of places. It has a side-scrolling section because of fucking course it does. We have to play at the game's pace, am I right? And at the end of the stage, if you don't hit the dash pad, the stage literally just kills you. Because God forbid we play at our own speed. No, we have to go at the game's pace. We have to do what the game wants us to do. What are we, PlayStation fanboys? Simply put, Classic Sonic was a mess. His gameplay was bad, his physics were bad, and his stages were bottom of the barrel. Some of the worst 2D platforming segments I've ever seen in a Sonic game, which is already saying a lot considering Forces really hasn't set the bar too high. Having Super Sonic be playable in Sonic Forces is of course really fucking cool. It's always good when Super Sonic shows up, and in a better game I might even praise it, but unfortunately there's really not much to do with Super Sonic. It doesn't even feel rewarding using him in Forces, because all you have to do is just download the DLC and then beat a stage, and then voila, you can play as him in every other stage. Unlocking him is piss easy, and unfortunately because the game showers you in rings, it just makes every stage even easier than they already were. Not to mention that there's rarely any times where you can really open the taps with Super Sonic, so to speak, because the stages are so restrictive. So whilst yes, it's cool that you can play as him, why would you really want to? And now to conclude the video, we can talk about episode Shadow. He has all the same restrictions and issues that modern Sonic has, however it's pretty cool that he can chain kill large groups of enemies. That one feature alone makes him better than Sonic in my opinion, even if he doesn't have access to his super form. However, that doesn't really change much when the levels you're playing through are just reused assets from the main campaign. His run-through of Sunset Heights is basically ripped from Sonic's campaign. His run-through of the forest was basically ripped from the Avatar. And his run-through of Green Hill Zone was also ripped from the Avatar, as there's very little else to distinguish the two stages. Thank goodness that this DLC was free at least, because you would be getting ripped off if it wasn't. Since all you're paying for are just reused assets, but you're just playing as a different character. You don't even get to play as Shadow in the main campaign either. He's literally just locked to these 3 stages, which is such a shame. And that really sums up Sonic Forces in a nutshell, doesn't it? The idea that the game was a good concept, but just executed poorly. I'm the Gaming Rift, I thank you all for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Take care.